Hi gang, Ed Dale here and welcome to the 30-day challenge lesson. And today I want to talk to you about something that's very, very important, and that is once you're starting to get traffic to your site, you need to be able to convert that traffic. And there is one thing that head and shoulders above the rest absolutely makes a massive difference to your conversion. It's the number one factor, and that is a headline. And as you can see there, that's quite an interesting one there from the Daily Record in Scotland. But when I started to think about headlines and talking about this today with you guys in the 30-day challenge, I realized that, today we use headlines everywhere, and I mean everywhere, and your ability to get better at headlines is absolutely crucial. Because when you think about it, look, this is just a small sample of the incredible number of messages that hit you every single day. In some ways, back in the the early days of direct marketing, one advantage that they had was that there were very few forms of media to, unless you were reading an ad in a magazine or you got sent in the mail or saw it on a newspaper, there was those media. In fact, what was there? It was radio, television, a letter in the mail, magazines and newspapers, print media. That was it. But today, of course, there are so many competing mediums and media that are all competing for your attention at any one particular point in time. The only way you're going to stand out and capture any of that attention is through doing good headlines. And that's what this is all about today. Because when you think about it, think about the filter. I went down this with Hannah and Molly. It was very exciting. It's the drop before you get in here, which makes it even more exciting. But I put this photo up here because it represents one giant filter. And that's what we literally have to have. And the only way to break through that filter is to get through somebody's filters through your headline. And if you think about where you see headlines every single day, just think about your email box and think about what you click on and what you don't click on. I mean, the statistics are terrifying, and we'll come to that very shortly. There are the absolute masters of the headline, and really one of the best things you can do to get better at headlines is literally just look up some of the people that I'm about to show you and get them and read their headlines. And more importantly than read their headlines, I want you to write their headlines out, and we'll talk about this in the action section. But this is a picture of John Carlton looking all studly there up somewhere high and posy. But one of my favourite headlines of all time was one that John wrote, which was the one-legged golfer. And it talked about how this one-legged golfer could outdrive everybody else on the PGA Tour. He humiliated, I remember, PGA Tour golfers. And that headline was just, to me, superb and instantly spoke to me as a golfer. I'm going to go through at the end of this particular lesson some rules of thumb, if you will, and looking at it from a very different way. Because if you look, the other thing that we're facing, of course, in this day and age is accountability. Because when you think about it, everything is measurable, and you should be measuring everything. How many people are clicking on your Twitter post? How many people are clicking on your blog to read your blog? How many people are looking at the article in the RSS feeder, like blog lines, and actually then going in to read what you have to say instead of just scanning it? All of these are a function of writing a good headline. And I'll tell you what, the inspiration for this little lesson here came from this book. It's called Save the Cat. It's by a guy called Blake Snyder, and it's talking about screenwriting, actually, writing for movies and selling your screenplay. And just for those of you who aren't familiar, screenplay is like a script. It's the story that will eventually be turned into a TV show or a movie, or I suppose more and more on in this day and age, maybe a just-in-TV show like 30-day challenge TV. And with this book, he talks about that the number one thing, the most important thing to getting your screenplay sold has got nothing to do with how good the actual story is, but how you can get studio executives' interest through the use of your logline. And your logline is basically, it's a headline, it's a description of the movie. It's like, this movie is the X-Files meets Bambi. That sort of description, you've heard them all the time on various movies and so on like that, where somebody pitches a commercial or pitches a movie or a TV show. And when you think about it, think about Twitter for an example. Twitter is really an excuse to write a headline every time you do a Twitter. And I think actually Twitter is a brilliant place to practice your headlines as well, because not only can you practice writing them, but you can actually then get some feedback as to how many people have actually clicked on your headline. So I'll talk about how you sign up for that very shortly. But this book, Save the Cat, it had a number of criteria for what it considered a good headline, if you will, to use our language, for a screenplay or a good logline. And I found these particular categories absolutely fascinating, because when I thought about my favourite headlines and headlines that I knew were really effective, they absolutely had these characteristics as well. So I just wanted to go through those characteristics with you now. The first characteristic is irony. Now this is interesting, and here's a classic picture, Heaven Street, Dead End. It's a classic picture of irony. And irony, to me, when you think about it, let's use my favourite headline of all time, the one-legged golfer. One-legged golfer outdrives PGA Tour pros. That's irony. Here are all these professionals, and here's this guy with one leg who's hitting the ball further. That's ironic. I wish Tubby Nerd was ironic, but it's actually got an element of truth to it. But if you think about all your favourite headlines, and you go now and have a look at the headlines that work, they've got an element of irony in them. And this was really interesting, because I went back through, and my favourite source of headlines is, of course, the late great Gary Halbert. And the Gary Halbert newsletters are still well and truly available. They're there for free, which is an astounding resource for people who are interested in getting started in copywriting. And I'd really recommend you have a look at that. And Gary's process for actually getting good at headlines is one that I'll be telling you about shortly. The next thing that a logline or a good headline should have is a memorable, compelling mental picture. And again, let's go back to the one-legged golfer outdriving PGA Tour pros. Bam! I've got an instant picture of that. That is a compelling mental picture. That's something I can imagine. I mean, check out the hairstyle on this lady at this airport. I mean, that's something you're not going to forget in a hurry. So any sort of compelling mental picture is great. You combine the two, you combine irony with that compelling mental picture, and you've got something that's very powerful. Now, do I expect you guys to be writing magnificent John Carlton, Gary Halbert-esque quality headlines straight off the bat? No. It took those guys years to get that good. It will take you years to get that good. But you know what? You've got to start. You absolutely have to start. And this is what I'm hoping to get you thinking about in this video. And mainly, I tell you what, one of the main beneficiaries of this video is me, because I really hadn't been paying attention to, like, in terms of Twitter posts or headlines for emails I've been sending out and so on. And this was a real wake-up call. This book to me was an extraordinary wake-up call, just because I was looking at something that was fresh from outside our industry and realised that, those fundamentals are still the same. Another great element, and this was one I was thinking about, and I thought, does this really apply to us? And that is audience and cost. And when he was talking about this in the movie context, he was talking about, a good logline, a good headline, really conveys the audience that it's trying to attract. And believe it or not, it also gives the studio executive a feel for the expense of the movie. And he talks about, in the book, he talks about a movie called Four Christmases. Now that Four Christmases, automatically, that does a whole lot of things in a studio executive's mind. They think, Christmas, okay, so if it's good, perennial reruns. It's about four families on a block. So that's very cheap. They don't have to move the cast and crew. Even though there's just 2 words, 4 Christmases, there's actually a whole lot of subconscious information passed along with that particular title of a movie. And so I started to think about this, and I thought, well, does that really apply to what we're talking about? And then I basically thought, hell yes it does. Absolutely it does. Think about this, folks. If you are targeting a particular audience, and I've got to say, just as an aside, the number one mistake internet marketers make when it comes to writing copy and so on is trying to please everybody and being worried about offending a certain area of your marketplace. It's crazy when you're dealing in a business that, if you're really, 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 really good, 5 people in every 100 are going to buy from you. You need to learn to filter, particularly when you start thinking about another very important place where headlines are vital, which is pay-per-click advertising. Frankly, you don't want people just clicking on your ad willy-nilly. We used to in the old days. It was a very good technique, still works today in some markets. Instead of advertising a free ebook, we'd actually say book cost $27.95 because we didn't want somebody to click who was not going to be prepared to pay $27.95. We didn't want to spend that extra money, so that headline did convey a cost. And if you think about the audience, and there's this very famous, again, I can't talk copywriting without talking about Gary all the time. There was the very famous, and if you look this up, it's wonderful and very funny to read, where he's actually advertised in the LA Times for a date. It's a very famous ad. He took out a full page in the LA Times to find a date. It worked a treat, but the copy was magnificent. And he was filtering out with the headline and with everything else the types of people that he was interested in dating. It was a key thing. Really important to understand. So when I thought about this particular, headline, logline requirement for movies, I thought, yeah, you know what? Audience and cost is actually a wonderful thing to convey in a headline. The final element of what they were talking about in what Blake Snyder was talking about in Save the Cat was, you know what? Your headline and logline should say what it is, and preferably does so in a really clever way. And he talked about one of the movie titles that he loved a lot, which was called Legally Blonde. That tells you so much. 2 words and tells you so much. Now we've got the luxury, I suppose, in the types of headlines that we use to, well, in Twitter's case, have 145 characters, so we can usually use a little bit more than that. But saying what it is or saying what it does and doing it in a clever way, the technique that the one-legged golfer used to humiliate PGA Tour pros. Very clear what that is, and it does it in a wonderfully clever way. It does use one of my favourite words, humiliate, as John Carlton would call it, a power verb. It just is brilliant. And so when I looked at those 4 criteria that we just talked about, I thought, you know what? They're 4 pretty good targets to aim for. Now, do you think that you're going to hit those targets all the time? No, of course not. I very rarely do. But the important point is to start practicing and start doing things. So, like all good lessons should, we've got some action points for you. And these are very easy, and they're very much inside your control and sphere of influence. So there's no excuse not to do what I'm about to talk about. So the first thing that I want you to do is head over to Twitter, and that's www.twitter.com. Now, you may already have a Twitter account, but if you don't, then what I want you to do is, you can see here I've said, number 1, watch this. Watch the video and have a look at what Twitter is used for. Now, suffice to say, there is a huge amount of things that you can do with Twitter in a marketing context. It's a very, very powerful platform, something you need to know, something you'll certainly need to know for this year's 30-day challenge. So it's very, very important that you get familiar with Twitter right now. The The second point, if you can sign in if you already have an account, or 2, click on that green Get Started button and join and sign up. It's very quick, very easy, and they don't spam you or bombard you with anything. So it's really a service there to use. Then what I want you to do is head over, once you've signed in, head over and just have a look at this URL, and that's www.twitter.com/ed_Dale. That, folks, is my Twitter page, and you should click on it's not up there because I obviously can't follow myself, but you'll see underneath my photo there's a big follow button. If you click that, you'll be able to follow, and you'll be able to have a look at, amongst other things, my attempts at getting better with headlines. Also, I've got to say, for both Dan and myself, if you want to know immediately what's going on, then following us in Twitter is a great way to do that. And in the next week or so, we'll be showing you a video of how to do that, and do that in a way which is conducive, so that you don't feel that you're being bombarded by twits and all that. Twits, get it? Through Twitter and so on. At first glance, you might find Twitter, you might think to yourself, oh, what a waste. People just saying what they're doing. Please, hear me out. It's not a waste. And I've got to say, I copped so much heck last year from my fellow internet gurus about Twitter. And what are they all teaching right now? Twitter. So please, get on board. The other person that you should definitely be following is Dan. And you can get Dan using that address, Dan Rain, and click on the button. So once you're signed up, if you've got a blog or you've got anything else you want to let people know that you have Twitter, and if you use signatures in the forums, you should add your Twitter to your signature post in your forums. And here's what I want you to do. I just want you to practice 3 Twitter headlines a day. Honestly, it's not how good these headlines are. It's about you actually doing them. If you can do a week, even a work week, 5 days of 3 Twitter headlines a day, that's moving in the right direction. You just need to practice. It's like anything else. The more headlines you write, the better you will get at it. And that's the trick. And so using Twitter, you can kill 2 birds literally with 1 stone. Because, for example, if you've got a blog, you can let people know about your new blog post using Twitter, for example. Or if you've seen a really cool website, you can let your friends know through Twitter about this really cool website. But have a think about those 4 characteristics of the headline: irony, a compelling mental picture, audience and cost, who's it for, what's it going to cost, and, of course, say what it is, and preferably in a clever way. Then you're going to get better at it. You're never going to hit those 4 initially. You won't come even close, 4, but the point is to just have a try and to get 3 headlines up a day through Twitter. Something else I want you to start doing, and you can do this very particularly in your email box, but also in magazines and Twitter posts and everything else. Start collecting headlines. Start noting down, and email's great for this, because notice the emails you actually click on, particularly emails from, say, a newsletter that you receive. Like, for example, I get Joel Combs' email, and sorry to say, Joel, I don't read it every day, but I do like to get it. But it's fascinating. That's a great one for me, because he pretty much mails on a daily basis, God bless him, which is great, but it's not every day I read it. And I love to take note of the headlines that he uses on the days that I do read it, because what caught my attention, and I figure if it catches my jaded attention, that's probably a pretty good headline to use. So you need to start doing that. I want you to do one other thing, is I want you to write them down. You heard me right, not copy and paste. I want you to write them down in a good old notebook. I use Moleskine notebooks, my Apple version there, but use whatever you can. But it's very, very important. There's a bunch of science. There's a bunch of just science, which talks about the benefits of actually tangibly writing something down. Those benefits and the recollection benefits and the ability to churn up those headlines, because here's the thing, you'll struggle writing headlines initially because you've got nothing in your memory banks. Your memory banks are depleted. But I tell you what, you start collecting good headlines and you start writing them, and I mean writing them down in your book, and then when you need some inspiration, just flicking through your little headline notepad, boy, you are going to start, all of a sudden you're going to start finding yourself using headlines. And it's really, really cool. This is how it works, folks, I'm telling you. So have a crack at that, because you've got to understand, headlines and changing headlines can have a dramatic impact in your conversion ratio. After price, it's the #1 thing to test. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and we'll be back next week with another lesson on the 30-day challenge. Speak soon. And by the way, if you're new to the 30-day challenge, remember that the 2007 30-day challenge is up, it's online, and it's just as relevant today as it was when we first did it in August. It's be a brilliant thing for you to start right now, because by going through that, as everybody who's a veteran of the 30-day challenge will tell you, the second time is always easier. There are literally 50 people every single day starting the 30-day challenge, so there's always somebody there starting it with you. So have a crack at that. Thanks for listening. Really look forward to speaking to you. Speak soon. Ciao for now.